Next on Unsolved Mysteries, a husband and father is sentenced to life in prison for a series of rapes. But two of the victims say he's not the man who assaulted them. 5 children died after they are trapped in a burning house. Police say a drug deal gone wrong led to arson and murder. A woman honored as a national hero is actually the mastermind behind a $1 million baby selling ring. And the military says that he died in action, but a photo convinces his family that he's still alive. Perhaps there's someone watching who can help solve one of these cases, and maybe it's you. I'm Dennis Farina, so stick around. Coral Gables, Florida. A 17-year-old girl who we'll call Judy was driving along a stretch of Bird Road.
It was kind of late at night. I noticed a car following me, flashing its headlights. I waved for him to pass. I slowed down. I sped up. I didn't know if he wanted to go around me, if it was a friend of mine. I wasn't sure what it was. And I didn't pull off the road, but I slowed down enough on the road where he came up next to me. And I looked over to see if it was somebody I knew or a police officer.
Get out of the car.
What?
Hurry up and get out of the car. Come on, get in my car. Don't look at me. Don't scream, I've got this gun in my hand. I know what this can do.
The man drove Judy to a deserted construction site, put the gun to her head, and raped her. He took her panties and driver's license, then dumped her off 5 or 6 blocks from where he had kidnapped her.
Now lie face down on the ground. Don't look up until I tell you to.
The attack was the first of many to come in the Miami area. Over the next 2 years, dozens of women were approached, and 24 of them were kidnapped. Some were sexually assaulted. The identified assailant became known as the Bird Road Rapist.
I described him as someone who was about 6 foot, 6'2", 220 pounds. I described what I thought was an average-sized person. I never saw him standing. I described a sitting male.
Judy says the rapist spoke English with a slight Spanish accent, had a mustache and a pockmarked face, and drove a dark green car. 2 days later, Judy was at her job at a gas station when she thought she saw the same car in which she had been raped.
I think that's the car.
I walked out there and I was positive it was him. I got his tag number and a description. I called the police immediately after he left and gave them all the information. They came out and took a statement.
Police checked the license plate and tracked down the car's owner, Luis Diaz, a cook at a local Cuban restaurant.
Can you tell me what kind of car you drive?
No English.
All right. 2 days ago, 10 in the morning, can you tell
Luis
us
did
where
not
you were
speak
and
English,
whereabouts?
had no criminal record, and did not fit the physical description. At 5 feet 3 and 140 pounds, he was a foot shorter and 100 pounds lighter than the man that Judy described as her assailant. Luis was dismissed as a suspect. The rapes continued at the rate of 1 attack a month.
Get in the car. Hurry up and don't scream or I'll kill you. Get in. Hurry up.
Police assumed that all the Bird Road rapes were committed by one man. However, the survivors described him very differently. Some said that the rapist was short, others that he was tall. He had a mustache. No, he was clean-shaven. He spoke English with a Spanish accent. No, he had no accent at all. His car? Several different models were described. It was a tough case with a slew of conflicting leads. Once the rapes were leaked to the media, the publicity put additional pressure on the police to find a suspect.
They did everything they could to possibly find this man, except, of course, to go back and re-investigate the man that I identified as my attacker.
Judy convinced police to take another look at Luis Diaz, who was still working as a cook.
I'd like you to come back to the station.
He doesn't speak English.
Sure he does. We need to ask you some questions.
Dice que necesita que lo acompañe a la estación de policía.
Los detectives me hablaron a mí en inglés. Y entonces yo no la podía contestar, porque de tantas palabras que me decían, no podía yo captar en inglés lo que decían.
Puedo ir a las 11 cuando yo termino. Possibly he can go with you at 11 when he's finished.
I guess that'd be all right.
No, en ningún momento yo tuve miedo. ¿Por qué voy a tener miedo si yo no era una persona libre y no me sentía culpable de nada? Y me cooperé mucho con ellos también.
Can you give us a minute, please?
Police decided to show a photo lineup that included a shot of Luis to another rape victim. She had been attacked only 2 months earlier.
Just take a look at their faces and see if you can recognize the guy.
I guess I'd have to say this guy. ¿Quién es? ¿Pero qué quieren?
We're here for the third row rapist!
On the night Luis was arrested, police impounded the family car, looking for traces of blood, semen stains, hairs, and fibers that could connect him to the rapes. They found nothing. They tore apart Luis's home, searching for the gun used in the attacks, plus the panties and driver's licenses taken from the women. Again, they found nothing. However, 16 of the women who had been assaulted came in to look at the police lineup. 8 identified Luis as the rapist.
Yes.
What number?
Number 3.
The rest said Luis was not the rapist. The state charged no one else with their assaults and stopped looking for any other suspect. Since the rapist spoke English, a key prosecution goal was proving Luis spoke English. Police interviewed people who knew Luis, with Detective Fernando Mendez acting as an interpreter. Mendez would later play a key role at the trial.
No, yo no hablo inglés.
Tell her we'd like to ask her a few questions about her former neighbor, Luis Diaz.
After the interviews, police filed a report confirming that Luis did speak English. The police report also claimed Luis had a brother-in-law in the used car business, and therefore could easily have borrowed the different cars used in the assaults. Evidence against Luis Diaz was mounting. But when Luis went to trial, the strongest evidence against him was the testimony of the 8 women who identified him as the rapist.
Well, clearly they put a lot of manpower into this. And you would think they would find one piece of evidence connecting Diaz with these offenses. Either, women had clothing stolen or other things stolen, weapons, whatever it may be. But they found nothing. Not a single piece of evidence to match Diaz to these offenses.
Now, this man spoke fluent English, didn't he?
He spoke English to me. I don't know if he is fluent in the language.
The women all said their attacker had communicated with them in English.
Diaz had a part-time lawn mowing business. And we found a number of people who had gone to talk to him about mowing their lawns and doing work for them, and they tried to speak to him in English, and yet he couldn't speak to them. He had to go get somebody to be able to talk to them. And if there was ever a situation where if a person could speak English, they would use it, it would be in trying to get work like that and help him in his business. And yet we had a number of witnesses who testified that he could not use English, even when it was to his advantage to use it.
The prosecution insisted Luis spoke enough English to be the rapist. 2 detectives testified that after he was arrested, he spoke to them in English for 90 minutes.
You would think that if they had an hour-and-a-half conversation with the chief suspect in these offenses, and he was speaking in English, just like these women said, you'd think they would even tape record 5 minutes of this? I mean, it's just unbelievable that none of this was done. And it wasn't done because it's not true. That's why it wasn't done.
According to the defense, Luis had little opportunity to commit the crimes. His wife always dropped him off at work and picked him up when he was done. The defense hired private investigator Virginia SNYDER, and she discovered that Detective Mendez was wrong about Luis's brother-in-law.
Mendez had reported that Mr. Diaz had access to different cars because his brother-in-law owned or worked at a used car lot. I found out that this was a total lie. His brother-in-law was an insurance agent.
The defense also played up a unique side effect of Luis's job as a cook, the smell.
You just get full of the fat and grease and the smells from doing this all night long, and yet they claim that after leaving work he would go and do these rapes, and yet not a single woman smelled anything unusual about the man.
Those of us in the courtroom didn't smell any garlic when this man testified, and there were some questions and comments made about that there was no garlic odor in the courtroom. So apparently it's not as strong as they said it was, or it just wasn't a true statement.
Despite all the defense's efforts, none of their arguments could outweigh the power of eyewitness testimony. Each of the 8 women identified Luis Diaz as the Bird Road rapist.
That's the man, right there, next to the woman.
She identified the...
And it's clear that eyewitness testimony is the least reliable of any evidence that's presented in a courtroom. For example, one woman says that the man who raped me is 6'2", and turns out Diaz is 5'3". I mean, that is a classic example of the inaccuracies of eyewitness testimony.
People are human, and they see things differently, they remember things differently, and when they're nervous, they're traumatized. And the key to a case like this is, can you recognize someone you've seen before, not can you draw his face?
I don't know how the police came up with the theory of the one rapist, except that they fabricated it, in my opinion. When you have such a variety of descriptions of sizes, of heights, of color, hair, mustache, no mustache, pockmarked face, no pockmarked face, and they're able to put that all together and say that fit Mr. Diaz's description, I don't know how they're able to do it.
The jury took only 3 hours to reach a verdict. Luis Diaz was guilty. The sentence, 13 life terms plus 55 years.
Entonces vino 2 policías y me agarraron los brazos. Entonces me sacaron las huellas y uno de ellos me dijeron, tú te vamos a tirar para la prisión para que te mueras allá. Cuando me dijo eso, mi alma se desplomó, como diciendo, ya no puedo ver a mis hijos. He perdido a mi señora de 19 años casada.
Next, 2 of the victims who testified against Luis say they helped convict the wrong man. With Luis Diaz convicted, sentenced, and behind bars, the case of the Bird Road rapist should have been over. But for defense investigator Virginia SNYDER, this job was different.
After the trial, the judge looked at my case file, flipped through it, and commented that at the time of the trial, he had been convinced that Mr. Diaz was guilty. But after reading my report, suddenly he was not so sure.
At the judge's request, Virginia continued researching the case.
Muy buenas tardes. Buenas tardes.
Accompanied by an interpreter, Virginia talked to the same neighbors Detective Mendez had interviewed and discovered stunning discrepancies.
El detective Méndez dijo que usted ha escuchado o había escuchado a Luis hablar inglés.
Ay, no, yo no dije eso.
¿Usted no lo dijo?
No.
Bueno, señor.
Mendez had stated that one or more of the witnesses had said that Mr. Diaz spoke English, that he had access to different cars, that he came and went at different hours. All of the witnesses denied making any of these statements, and they did it under oath in deposition also.
A few years after Luis was convicted, Detective Mendez was himself accused of a crime. 5 counts of filing false police reports, all unrelated to the Diaz case. He pleaded guilty to the charges, but was allowed to resume work on the Metro-Dade police force. Virginia continued digging and came up with a new theory about the Bird Road rapist.
Because of the variety of descriptions of the assailants, I decided it couldn't possibly be one man, and it couldn't possibly be Mr. Diaz. So I kept working, looking for a gang, and eventually I came upon a gang that I felt did the rapes.
Virginia located a man in prison who claimed to be a member of the gang. He said that he didn't participate in the rapes, but knew those who did.
We were just drug dealers, you know. We used to hang around together, you know. And they used to like to have fun like that.
The man gave Virginia an 8-page affidavit swearing Luis is innocent.
I think Luis Diaz is innocent, and I'd like to see this case reopened and really looked at thoroughly.
This woman, who we call Debbie, had her own frightening run-in with the Bird Road rapist. A man pulled up beside Debbie's car and aimed a gun at her. She dropped down on the seat, gunned the engine, and managed to escape.
When I first described my assailant, I described him as being around 6 foot, clean-shaven, dark blonde hair, and an American. And Luis Diaz is completely opposite. When the police called me into the lineup, I trusted their decision that they had the correct man, that they had the rapist. But I had seen him on the TV prior to my IDing him. He looked totally different from the man that my description of my assailant. But I thought the police had the correct man. They said, this is a Bird Road rapist, it must be. So I ID'd him.
On the day Debbie was set to testify, another incident again made her wonder if Luis truly was the Bird Road rapist.
And the girl that I was with, she was going to testify also against Luis Diaz. Well, we were talking about our experiences of the attack that day.
I can't remember the guy's face. Did you get a good look at Diaz?
I saw him in the lineup.
Right, but that was so long ago. And the attorney's gonna ask me to point him out, and I've got to make sure I point out Diaz.
Maybe somebody inside could help you.
Thanks.
And she told one of the men in the courtroom that she doesn't know what Mr. Luis Diaz looked like. He took her before court started into the court where Mr. Luis Diaz was and pointed to him and said, that is the man.
Hello.
So, how'd it go in there?
Great. He pointed out Diaz to me.
So he's the guy that attacked you?
Well, I'm not certain, but I'm gonna say that he is.
Immediately, I felt maybe I'm wrong also. And maybe this is not the man, but it must be because the police said it's him. After Luis Diaz had been convicted and sent to jail, the attacks didn't stop. I was approached again by another car with flashing lights that followed me again. So this was long after he had already been arrested and even sent to prison.
At least one other witness had doubts about the way the investigation was handled. We'll call her Mary. She declined to be interviewed, but did give us a signed statement about her experience. When she was shown a photo lineup that included Luis, Mary says she initially chose no one and asked to see more photographs. She was then told to look again and claims that she felt that she was being steered toward identifying Luis.
We need you to look a little harder, Mary. We're hoping to bring in a suspect and ask him a few questions.
So you guys just want someone else to point him out, right?
Right. Then we can make an arrest and find some answers.
Well, I guess I'd have to say this guy.
Good. We'll take that as a positive ID then. Thanks a lot, Mary.
Mary was equally unsure 1 week later when she saw Luis in the lineup.
Sexually assaulted you?
I'm not sure. Could be 3 or 5. I'm not positive. Could I look a little longer?
No problem.
After seeing a video of the lineup on 2 separate occasions, she finally convinced herself that the police must have proof that Luis was guilty and agreed to identify him. Today, she says he is not the man who raped her.
I've not heard from any of the witnesses who apparently have, or who may have changed their testimony, but after a jury verdict is in, the law looks with disfavor upon people who want to say they made a mistake. It could be based upon sympathy or fear or any one of a number of reasons.
I've been investigating this case for 12 years, and there's no doubt in my mind that Mr. Diaz is innocent. And I feel if all the facts can be brought to light, that he'll walk out a free man.
Our chief investigator was asked to review the case rather recently because of some complaints that maybe justice wasn't done, and after he read everything about the case, he reported to the state attorney that this was a just verdict.
Yo me siento completamente inocente de lo que se me está acusando, porque soy una persona que la capacidad mía no me permite hacer diferentes acciones, porque tengo 3 hijos y hermanas que las considero como todas las que viven en este país.
For 26 years, more than a quarter century, Luis Diaz has maintained his complete and total innocence. Update. The long ordeal of Luis Diaz is finally over. DNA evidence cleared him of involvement in 2 of the Birdwell rape cases. After 26 years in prison, Luis Diaz was set free. He was honored by friends and family with a party at the same restaurant where he used to work. Next, arson takes the life of 5 children, and police say drug dealers are to blame. Dallas, Texas. Arson investigators sift through the ashes of a burnt-out home. 5 children are dead as a result of the fire. Authorities want to know why. The house belonged to a woman named Mollie Jordan. The victims were her great-granddaughter, 2-year-old Jasmine, and 4 of her grandchildren. Jamal, 6, Erica, 9, Bernard, 16, and 18-year-old Demetra, Jasmine's mother. At 3:30 on the day of the fire, the kids were all home from school. Their grandmother, Mollie Jordan, was about to leave for work.
Lydia's got to get to work. You have a good night, Mom. Okay, I will.
Mollie's job as a nurse would keep her away until 7 the next morning. But she carried a pager, so the children could reach her at any time. Around 3 a.m., 10-year-old KETRICK Jordan woke up and heard his brother, Bernard, talking to someone. Bernard was deeply involved with a local drug dealer.
I was walking to the refrigerator, and I saw the drug dealer and Bernard talking about, where's my money? And Bernard said, I don't know what you're talking about.
Bernard.
KETRICK, get back to bed.
But I was just
and don't come back out.
KETRICK was afraid to go back to his own bedroom and be alone.
So I went into my sister's room, and I went to bed. It seemed like I didn't sleep that long, but seemed like about 5 minutes later, he busted into the door and told me the house was on fire.
Everybody got to get up, the house is on fire.
He told me to start busting out windows and stuff to try to, get air coming through the house, because we couldn't go through the front door.
The only hope of escape was through the windows, but the safety releases for the burglar bars refused to budge.
I saw my sister, Erica, laying on the bed crying, and I tried to save her so she can get air, but she was in such a panic. And then my sister, she was busting out the windows, and she cut herself real bad, and she got into a panic. And I looked over to my little brother Jamal, and he was already dead. And I looked over to my niece Jazz, she was already dead.
By the time firefighters arrived, flames had engulfed much of the house. All 6 children were trapped. Firefighters tried to break down the front door. What they didn't know was that a couch had been propped up against the door, holding it closed. The burglar bars prevented any chance of a quick rescue. Ten minutes later, the firefighters finally got in. While parts of the house continued to burn, they searched for survivors. They found KETRICK Jordan first. KETRICK was burned over more than 75% of his body. Demetra was also pulled out alive, but she died the next day at the hospital. The bodies of the other 4 children were found huddled together at the foot of a barred window. At that very moment, Molly Jordan was rushing home from the hospital. She had been called by a relative who only said, "The children are all gone."
When I got about a mile or something from the house, one ambulance passed me and it was just screaming and going. Then I started feeling sick at the stomach. Then I was thinking, well, it didn't have to come from my house. There's a lot of houses up. But when I got within a few blocks, it was another one past me screaming and hollering. It seemed like I couldn't breathe, I couldn't walk, I couldn't stop. Just everything left my body, seemed like.
Arson investigators quickly determined that the deadly fire had been deliberately set.
In the main living room, we found a gasoline can that had been there during the fire. And later on during the investigation, we actually did find samples of flammable liquids that had been poured on the floor and set on fire.
Investigators soon pieced together what they believe are the events that led up to the deadly fire.
The drug people had come to seek payment from Bernard, wanted him to come outside. He did not come outside. They set the house on fire to get him to come outside, but unfortunately, the whole family got caught in the burglar bars and didn't come out. So we have an act of arson that resulted in 5 murders and 1 severe injury.
Police believe Bernard piled up furniture in a desperate attempt to keep the assailants out of the house. The couch jammed up against the front door and a love seat wedged behind the hallway door, trapping the children in the house. The arsonist probably entered through this window, one that was not equipped with bars.
We worked quite hard to try to find who was responsible for the fire. We did come up with one name, one of the individuals that was supplying the drugs to Bernard. His name was Curly, the nickname Curly. He was a black male, about 5'10" in height, weighed about 160 pounds. We never have found Curly or any of his friends, but Curly is known to have bragged about setting the fire.
3 days after the tragedy, thousands of people gathered to mourn the loss of the 5 Jordan children. KETRICK Jordan, the lone survivor, endured a dozen operations, including the amputation of both legs.
Okay.
Prosthetic limbs have allowed him to walk again. After the fire, contributions from the community enabled KETRICK and his grandmother to move to a new home in a different part of Dallas. Update. Dallas police arrested 31-year-old Vincent Thomas and charged him with capital murder in this case.
However, the charges were ultimately dropped. The district attorney concluded that he didn't have sufficient evidence to try Vincent Thomas. Authorities consider this case unresolved, but closed.
Next, an orphanage that literally stole children off the street and sold them to out-of-state couples. Memphis, Tennessee. In 1949, the Tennessee Children's Home Society was considered a model orphanage. Its director, Georgia Tan, was nationally recognized for single-handedly placing 5,000 children with new families.
But Georgia Tan had a much darker side that she kept well hidden from the children in her care and the parents who would adopt them. The effects of Tan's actions are still being felt today.
When I was growing up, I was told that I was adopted from Memphis, Tennessee. After my adopted mother passed away, I was packing her things. I found correspondence from the Tennessee Children's Home. And that's when I started my search. 2.5 years later, I found my name. 2 hours later, I found my mother.
Cindy Lou Presto discovered that she was separated from her family when she was just 2 years old. But after Cindy found her birth mother, Evelyn Bridgewater, she learned about the sinister events that led up to her adoption.
I was playing on the playground, and Georgia Tan drove up in her proverbial black limousine.
Hello, pretty girl. Would you like to ride in my new car with me? Can you run? Yes, you can. Okay, George, let's go home now.
Cindy was simply stolen by Georgia Tan.
Sandra Lee Bridgewater?
She and several other children were taken to juvenile court in Memphis, where she was brought before Judge Camille Kelly.
Good morning, children.
Cindy's mother had no idea that her daughter had been kidnapped until she got a call from the juvenile court. Incredibly, she was asked to sign papers making Cindy eligible for adoption. She refused.
Thank you, Judge Kelly.
Judge Kelly overruled Cindy's mother, and Cindy was taken away. Judge Kelly was a well-respected citizen of Memphis. A national poll selected her as one of the 6 most wholesome women in the world, along with Queen Elizabeth of England.
I'm confident that Camille Kelly was involved with Georgia Tan in this operation. Georgia Tan could not have carried it on without her, and Camille Kelly could not have lived in the style she lived unless she had outside income.
For 12 years, Georgia Tan used the Tennessee Children's Home Society as a cover for kidnapping and selling children. But in 1950, the governor ordered Memphis attorney Robert Taylor to investigate her activities.
How many of these little ones do you need for California?
We need 2 infant boys, a girl, and there's a toddler upstairs getting ready right now.
Taylor followed Georgia's assistant on her next trip to Los Angeles.
Time to go, George. Call me as soon as the last baby's delivered.
Don't worry, George. I'll take care of everything. Mr. and Mrs. Miles, say hi to your son, Ashley.
She would call the adoptive parents to meet her in the lobby, and she would go down into the lobby with one baby, and she had some maid there in the hotel, staying with the rest of them.
Sit down. Sign right there, please.
After talking with them for a few minutes, they were anxious to leave, and so was she, and she'd go back and get another baby, and it went on that way till she got rid of all of them.
Do you have the receipts for the...
I found that Georgia Tan had placed out over 1,200 babies for adoption in New York City and Los Angeles alone.
Tan made over $1 million in adoption fees, a remarkable sum in 1950.
She owned a lot of real estate around Memphis, and she owned a big tourist court down in Mississippi. She owned a summer home down on the Gulf Coast, and Over $1 million passed through our hands.
Robert Taylor sent his report on Georgia Tann to the governor. 3 days later, Tann died of cancer. Judge Kelly resigned soon after, and the Tennessee Children's Home Society was closed.
I get very angry when I think of Georgia Tann and Camille Kelly because of what they've done to me and thousands of other people. We're not talking about just a couple of people here, we're talking about thousands of children. It makes me very angry because of the 32 years that we were apart and all that we had missed. My mother had missed my growing up, and those years can never be replaced. We've been robbed.
Update. After this story aired, another child placed by Georgia Tann was reunited with her family. Lynn Heinz was 5 years old when she was adopted by a wealthy California couple.
I was adopted into a very, very fine family, but there wasn't a lot of love in the family. And so it meant a great deal to me to find that I really had a true family.
Just 3 weeks after our broadcast, Lynn learned that her father and two brothers were still living in Tennessee.
One of the things that I had been fearful is that the family did not want me to find them. When I did finally get hold of Randall, Randall said, if you don't come here, we're coming there. Like tomorrow. You know, it wasn't soon enough.
The next day, Lynn met her brothers for the first time in more than 40 years.
Took me that long to find you guys.
When she walked off the plane, I knew who she was just like that. She's a spitting image of her mother. A very spitting image.
That afternoon, Randall and Paul took Lynn to meet their 86-year-old father, Rufus Gookin.
We naturally had to compare all our pictures and all that type of thing, and it was very exciting, very thrilling.
You know, just like yesterday, you know, somebody to love and be loved by that you never had before.
I would have to say that this is like Christmas, New Year's, everything rolled up into one.
Next, a sailor is lost at sea, but a newspaper photo seems to show he's alive. Ziegler, Illinois, where Frank Joseph Bloomer was born on October 12, 1921. When World War II broke out, he enlisted in the Navy against his parents' wishes. Frankie served as a radio technician aboard the USS Rowan, a destroyer that was operating in the Mediterranean Sea. On September 11, 1943, just off the coast of Italy, a German U-boat targeted the Rowan, and it sank in less than a minute. 202 American soldiers were killed. Reported missing in action was 22-year-old radio man, third class, Frankie Bloomer.
His parents heard that the Rowan was sunk on their car radio. In a short time, they were notified that it was missing in action.
Less than a week later, Frankie's mother saw a newspaper article with this photograph of the three survivors of the USS Rowan. She thought that she recognized the man in the middle as her son.
Look.
She quickly contacted Frankie's sister-in-law, Dorothy.
Yeah. See the eyebrows? I do.
The two women compared the newspaper photographs with pictures of Frankie.
I noticed that too.
Oh, what is it? When I first saw the newspaper picture of the three survivors, I was positive the one was Frankie. It had characteristics, he had features, and I knew it was Frankie.
Jane took the photographs to a local mortician who was an expert at photo identification.
See how he's holding his arm there? Did he ever break his arm, maybe as a child?
Yes, he did.
I would say that these two men are absolutely the same.
When the mortician told my mother-in-law that he felt this picture was of Frankie, it gave her a lot more hope. She wrote to the American Red Cross to see if they could help her, and they said they got all of their information from the War Department, and that they could not find any information that she did not already have.
Frankie's mother never stopped believing that her son was alive. When she died, she passed her hope to her granddaughter, Janie.
As a very small girl, the first time I can remember hearing or finding out about my Uncle Frankie was at my grandma's house. I noticed the picture sitting on the mantle. I went over and I asked my grandma, I said, well, who is this? And she said, this is your Uncle Frankie.
He went into the Navy a long time ago. He just hasn't come back yet, and I'm sure he will.
I would say that my grandmother and grandfather lived with this haunting feeling of never knowing if he was alive or dead until the day they died. I think my grandparents would commemorate Frankie's birthday in different ways from year to year. It never went forgotten. I can recall a time when we were over at my grandmother's house to eat dinner, and there happened to be a cake on the table, and I asked why there was a cake there, and she told me that it was because it was Frankie's birthday. I'm searching to find the answer, whether he is alive or dead, so that I don't end up the same way that my grandparents did, because they both died not knowing the real truth of whether he was alive or dead.
Eventually, Frankie's family erected a memorial headstone in his honor.
I do go to the grave occasionally, and our family is all buried in the same proximity. It's kind of strange, though, when I look at my Uncle Frankie's grave marker and know that he's not in there, and think of the possibility that he could be walking a street somewhere, yet there's a marker here with his name on it.
Update. After this story aired, we received letters from one of the other men in the photograph. He informed us that the man in the middle was not Frankie Bloomer. Although this news was not what the Bloomer family had hoped for, they were relieved to have a resolution to their long search.